So we are live, and I'm really excited about our guest that we have on today. This episode is highlighting a mentor of mine, Sheryl Mejía. She runs Steward Capital. She's an anchor LP, but she's also a mentor, a longtime mentor to me, and also just the emerging manager community. So Sheryl, thanks for being generous with your time and coming on the show and sharing some wisdom with us today.
Thanks, Joel. Well, you're just a wonderful communicator in the industry and just supporting the LP community in their best practices, but also newly forming GPs. So I know we both share a passion for new founders and making sure they get on their path to greatness and getting through some of the milestones and filling up their tank with resilience so that they can be innovators in the area of finance. So you are at the lead of that innovation. So I'm thrilled to be with you today. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sheryl. And it's been great just building a personal friendship with you. So on that note, I know a little bit about your education and your career. Some of the people that are on this podcast tuning in are people that are looking to build their career in private equity, investment banking, venture capital, whatever it be, whether it's private markets or even public markets. What I'm always passionate about is just taking the wisdom that I have and sharing that with younger generations. So I think what would be really helpful is just learning a little bit about your background, the education that you acquired, some learnings that you picked up, over the years, and how that got you into your first, position out of college, and just maybe looking back some tidbits of wisdom that you have. So maybe we start with that: your professional background, your career, your education, and then we have a lot of things to unpack. So definitely excited to cover all the other things that we have in store today.
Great. Well, thanks, Joel. It's great to go over very, relatively quickly. I've been in New York 30 years, but I was originally spent the first 25 years of my life in Canada. And so I'm truly a NAFTA baby because even when I was growing up in Canada, we lived some time, our family moved to Mexico because my father was in the auto industry. So actually a Detroit, Windsor kid originally. So it's a great combination having lived in all three countries in NAFTA, and it just was fantastic growing up in Canada. I was a Queen's University graduate, really a family university, but ultimately when I got to New York after finishing my MBA at Wharton, it was a combination of the last 30 years in large and small shops, and that I think is just been an incredible movie to enjoy and learn from. The mentors in each place were different. I think in small shops you get to see everything,
Mm-hmm.
and you get to be part of the cooking, really truly down to the ingredients level. But in large shops, you just see how the largest organizations make decisions in those enormous engines of decision process that really affect, have enormous waves of influence across the world. And so I started out in KPMG in Toronto. And had some great mentors there in the partnership, but then left the MBA. I was at my first job out of the MBA was with some of my partners that are today at Steward,
Mm-hmm.
and we were at the foundation of founding a lot of the products that exist today in private markets. It really wasn't you didn't call private equity that at the time, leveraged buyouts or buyouts, and then in terms of venture was really a very nascent industry at that time, and so you really had a lot of products that are coming to market. And I really enjoyed the innovation of the Bankers Trust, and then ultimately as it used the broader Deutsche Bank platform. So Vera was with me at that time, and then when we left Bankers Trust, it was Deutsche then. We founded Decagon Advisors after I had spent a little bit of time. My first founding team was with the family office after I left Deutsche, and I was a client at Deutsche, and they had brought me on to help them move from a family office to have their own product, and it was great. And so we came together. They became our first consulting client of Decagon Advisors, which is still part of Steward today.
Mm-hmm.
And that was Katsura, who's on our team today, and Vera and I led that, but we had a lot of support from Christine Egan, Wayne Nemeth, and Christine Kwok, who are also on our team today at Steward. So it really started early on in the 08-09 period when we formed Decagon, and really started our consulting roots that we still use today and as we deploy our strategy. And that was launch consulting and also diligence consulting. And it was, it's the same side of, either it's the same knowledge base, but just the other side of the coin. So it's been fun. And so, but between Decagon, I turned the Decagon over to the partners that remained, and I went off to lead the New York Common Retirement Fund, and under the leadership of Vicki Fuller and New York State Controller Tom DiNapoli, who are enormous leaders and foundational leaders in the modern emerging manager landscape. And that portfolio, we grew it from 5 to 8 billion. And their vision that I was, really responsible for deploying was really to expand into the private markets angles. And so we really were prolific underwriters to new forming private equity firms primarily, which was the largest activity there.
Mm-hmm.
During that time, though, we had an aha moment, because as we did the strategic planning for that program, which, getting closer to 8 billion, and what else would we be doing? We've done Fund 1, 2s, and 3s. We've done a transition program that'll allow us to transition the managers into the bigger program and get larger checks from the main program at the pension, not just the emerging manager program. What do we do next? And the question really was, okay, we've seen these famous families, the Cohens and the Pritzkers, and the Hill families, and all other different anchoring newly forming firms. Who can help us? What firm can we go to that can be a partnership, create a partnership with us, who could be our extension of staff and our consultant to help us do more anchoring, which is typically 50% greater return profile in an already very attractive asset class of private equity. And we didn't find a really great provider because most providers had conflicts. So we ended up leaving New York Common and getting together with bringing the partnership together and partners I'd worked with before, and forming Steward so that we could be solely dedicated to making sure that not just wealthy, talented teams, but truly talented teams were able to form new firms.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And one common theme that I see that I think really formed good service level foundation is the consulting experience that you built, because I think with consulting, you're building that customer relationship and you understand the customer needs. And you might be doing, things that could be in the front office, the back office. So you just build a diversity of experience. So I think that's definitely something that could be a great pathway for students coming out of college. Maybe they do some consulting for private equity firms and understand, how they can support them through services. So I thought that was really a nice observation on my end to see that you did that. You kind of were on both sides of the table per se.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And, the next thing we want to talk about is maybe just double clicking on founding the firm and the anchor strategy. A couple of things that, you've published some really great content in terms of anchor investing. Maybe you can share a little insight in terms of maybe best practices of being an anchor investor. And the considerations for the LP side versus the GP side. I think in the past there's been some people that have mentioned that when you anchor, there also are some requirements to hit a certain AUM level as well. So maybe you can unpack that and maybe share a couple different flavors of how anchor investors operate and add value to their managers that they're investing in.
Yes. So just to level set, sort of the anchor investing location, especially the way we deploy it in a fund, so a diversified fund of anchoring. So we hope to do 10 to 15 in the next 4 years, strategic partnership deployments. Really, we're in the intersection of some very influential LPs who want to, even very strategically provide us sector insights and have strong knowledge and want to get more out of their private equity program. And on the other side of our transaction targets, we are really looking for managers that have sector expertise, and so as they really have sector expertise and can really win deals and change the arc of the companies they own. And the wonderful thing about the middle market is you have much more reliable hold periods because there are many more exit opportunities, strong cash flowing companies. But interestingly, as we look at those anchor partnerships that we will create with teams that are spinning out or independent sponsors today that are looking to form their first institutional fund, we're really looking at those partnerships that where we can start being value-added partners right away. Through, like you said, as a consulting lens, we bring a lot of templates, but we also can help them get through a lot of milestones. It's a very opaque marketplace in terms of what's required by some of the largest allocators to Fund 1s and Fund 2s. And it's a very narrow number of investors. It seems that there are really less than 5% of institutional and family office investors who have the capabilities and desire to be in a first fund. And so we've co-invested with many of those investors and understand the pitfalls and the desires and their requirements to get through. And so we really are helping those managers make it their way through. At the same time, we're working with our limited partners who potentially want to be in Fund 3 directly and want to make sure they have capacity in the most successful ones we curate, but they also want to be watching in Fund 1 and 2 as we're on the ground floor, writing that first check, writing the book. And so we need to take the pen out on the legal terms and really deploy some of the things that ELPA has been a leader in putting in place some of the best practices. And it's not just legal terms, but it's really business best practices in terms of cybersecurity or HR practices. This business really relies on human retention and employee practices. And so it goes at multiple levels in terms of just the employment practices we have within the asset management businesses with which we back, and then how they also use those same playbooks in the companies which they invest in.
Yeah, no, that was really helpful. And then, the next thing that I think could pivot from some of those insights is really some of the tectonic shifts that are occurring in private equity. You shared an article with me. I'll share this with the audience as well for reference, but I'll call out a couple high-level points to summarize what I gathered from it, and then I would love more deeper context from you. But the article really highlights just possibly a slower deployment cycle in 2024. LPs having to spend more time finding the right managers. The IRRs potentially also getting impacted. Maybe the managers didn't deploy sooner, so then because of that, their IRR isn't, showing the gains that they needed early on, and that might impact maybe the re-ups taking longer as well. So those are some of the high-level, takeaways that I got just from reading that. But I want to make sure that I captured that correctly, and would love your insights on that too.
Sure. Well, just starting from the very top level, the rates and the IPO window, rates going up and IPO window closing has been an enormous shift for the marketplace. So that's the sort of the big weight that's rolling around and really impacting how strategies are distributing. Rates have also had an impact on valuations of companies, because as most of the valuations that, if you look back at historic valuations in an industry and you're about to buy a company, you really can't look at historical EBITDA numbers, multiples of EBITDA, because EBITDA is before interest, and interest charges are now taking an enormous bite. So there's been an adjustment, and I think sellers right now are being more realistic. I think also those who are co-investing are being much more selective. They really want to know that these companies will be able to refinance their debt, and they really want to understand that refinancing calendar in the years to come, to make sure that. And there's been a number of really notable write-downs from some large private equity firms in healthcare, for instance, because of the stickiness of pricing and labor inefficiencies. There's been a couple of black eyes that have caused valuations to start coming into more attractive range. I do actually see an opening in 2024, and I think we mentioned that in that same letter, that you really do see the valuations starting to really soften, and that buyers and sellers are finding more and more clearing. Also, there's a large backlog of IPOs. Now, IPOs are not so relevant to our market because we're in the middle market. We tend to sell to more strategics or financial buyers, or into the enormous dry powder, large buyouts. But venture and large buyout strategies definitely have an extremely low DPI for this at this point in time.
Yeah.
If you're a 5-year-old fund, and that low distributions is causing a low turnover of capital in the industry. So LPs have to be very selective on the managers they're choosing. It has been a great time to have a cash strategy that's focused on cash flowing businesses, strategies that have more control, where you can control your hold periods, and you're at the seat in the boardroom, thinking about transaction, the timing of a transaction for the company, and that's become very, very important. And so it has brought an additional lens onto middle market strategies where financing is easier. You're starting from a lower base of market share, so your doubling of profits is easier, and so it's caused some rotation, and the financing is easier. So private credit's been a big there's been a big impetus putting capital raising in private credit, which has made the middle market company financings much easier. Still very expensive financing, and so the equity check is very valuable. And so I think we're getting some amazing valuations right now. It's we haven't seen this level of valuations for a while. So that said, though, it's interesting because if you look at the economy, you say, okay, valuations are attractive, and it's been a very pessimistic, climb out of COVID. But the interesting thing is when you look at the global economy, and especially look at the U.S. economy, with labor so strong and the consumer so strong, there's really nothing fundamentally broken. There's just an adjustment to who can be financed and who cannot, and that risk level. So it really is impacting, I think, the appetite for investors to make co-investments and to do direct investing. They're looking for that strategic partner to help them do extra, more deeper work before they allocate. So there's just a huge selectivity in the market right now. That's what we're seeing, and a preference for cash flows, strategically structured downside protection, and less reliance on IPOs.
And on the buyout side, can you share a couple more insights? I mean, I would say on the buyout side, it could be an attractive market just because, to your point, the valuations are lower. So are they getting a little more leverage in negotiating to offer like a cash offer, or whether it's like a half cash or half equity offer? Do you feel that there's a little more favor towards the buyout private equity investor versus just the traditional middle market PE investor in terms of terms?
So in terms of yes. Well, the LPs are certainly in the driver's seat, and that's a wonderful place to be in terms of setting terms. But in terms of the deals themselves,
I mean, the fund level investing in the deals, obviously they're a buyout fund. So I'm assuming, just because of the markets in venture, right? I mean, the software companies, obviously, some of the rounds are flat rounds. So they're saying, look, it's some of the best times to be a venture investor because you're getting high quality companies that where the valuations are not as frothy as they were. So I'm assuming just downstream, it's probably the same thing for maybe even middle market and buyout. Like maybe you could buy out a valuable company for a lower valuation than possibly, maybe 2-3 years ago because of those market conditions. But wanted to make sure you had some insights on that, or you agreed with that or disagreed with that.
I couldn't agree more. And there's a little bit of even crossover between venture and buyout, because there's some venture companies which have some valuable assets that need a cleanup of their investor base. So you find buyout investors taking a step in there, pulling companies out of venture portfolios. But on the actual, buying out of founder-owned companies, you're finding is because debt is expensive, and because there's a number of levels of uncertainty, whether it's financing or pricing pass-throughs, or just growth projections are just a little bit uncertain as with inflation and especially growth in earnings. The balance sheet is or the income statement is just a little bit less, harder to put a pin in exactly the projections. That you find the buyers are actually, and the sellers are finding typically an increase in the amount of seller rollover equity. So buyout, you're going in, maybe you've been at 80%. Or 100% buyout, with a rollover of 15%. Now that 15% is going up to 20 and 30 because maybe that's where the debt would have, extra debt would have been. Maybe that's where, the level of uncertainty is just, you want better alignment, and potentially the founder who's selling wants isn't quite sure that this valuation is the full valuation, wants to keep some money in the company as they watch changes occur. So it's a good amount of alignment that's coming out of this environment for buyout investors. And we really do believe that there's going to be, we're at record levels of large buyout dry powder. So there's going to be there's been an increasing demand for add-on transactions coming, from middle market. We really do believe there'll still be an appetizing number of exits for buyout middle market companies.
What are you seeing in terms of the trends across industries? I know we're going to double click on that a little more, but healthcare versus software versus hard assets. I really appreciated reading Sam Zell's book earlier this year, and one of the things when he started getting into private equity, he really loved investing in companies that had physical assets, because a lot of those physical assets you could sell off later and get some type of liquidity. So that was pretty interesting to read about. And I've talked to many private equity investors that have different syntheses of just industries. So, and I think you guys have had an interest in healthcare as well, but can you share some top level insights in terms of like the industries you like and why you think they're maybe more attractive than others?
Sure. Well, it's interesting you mentioned hard assets versus soft assets. Our the United States has been a leader in enterprise software, which is not a lot of hard assets, but still a very attractive area to invest.
Yeah.
But in terms of harder assets, I'll start with, you mentioned healthcare. The interesting thing in healthcare, I think it's dividing into some really interesting characteristics that, will cause a void or areas of focus for different teams, and just sort of spell out how our team is thinking of it. We're really thinking of the classic, 10 years ago, if you were investing in healthcare, it would be practices and dental and ophthalmology practices. That's a 10-year-old strategy. That has had pricing rigidity and labor problems, and it's not as attractive, and it's also difficult to get financing for some of those right now. The interesting wave we're facing in healthcare is there's a couple of tailwinds to both some of the innovation going on in healthcare, where we've got this intersection of technology, data, population management, and wealthy countries around the world do not want to be beholden to a Pfizer again or others that will have a vaccine. They want to have in-country discovery, development, manufacturing. They want to have their own systems. And so for devices, therapies, data management, and populations, therapies that really address a certain population's genetic and specific issues, we see a multi-decade wave of demand for labs, devices, robotics, and technology that will fill that next wave of therapeutics and discovery, and we're seeing it. In some areas, for instance, in the Middle East, you see a lot of remote population there, and you see demand for remote ultrasounds and routine testing is just skyrocketing. And there are a lot of teams working on those sort of projects. But those technologies are really, high cash flowing companies. The products are on the innovative end, but a classic service. And there's also even a nuanced service. We don't like to take risks on binary drug approvals. All of the services and platforms around the drug discovery, whether it's successful or not, are really an attractive. One of the most interesting transactions was the cold storage delivery of Pfizer's vaccine. That company, Softbox, was one of the most a very, very successful company.
Sure.
So that was a wave, but that's exactly where we're going as we have live cells that are part of the and then the biologics and in the interesting waves of drug discovery. You're going to find services and niche areas of high growth in healthcare that are going to be very, very interesting. So we're really watching devices and lab equipment and all of those areas. You really want to avoid areas that are not there's too much of a monopolistic pricing. So we have to be very careful there. But jumping into consumer, because there's a very big overlap between healthcare and consumer and the new waves of healthcare and direct consumer. just using an example of one of the products that one of the teams we know backed was Athletic Greens. I mean, I think a lot of folks have been following that company. It was a combination of being direct to consumer, understanding the consumer's need, and really filling a demand with that nutrition, that wave of nutritional athletic, extreme, high performance athletic nutrition that's required. And the number of people I know that have it, locked into their daily schedule are incredible. But the teams that propelled that company, though, really worked at the intersection of how to use that data that you get when you're direct to consumer. That's the big trend going on, where you have much more data when you're selling the product yourself versus your product's on the shelf at Walmart. You don't really get that information.
Yeah.
And that's where I think companies can tweak and add and find incredible adjacencies of for their product and variations of it. But that feedback loop is much easier and much faster now. Now, of course, we're all hitting delete and unsubscribe on our emails as the company.
Yeah.
But those who are dedicated or become loyal to a brand, sort of like that level of engagement.
Yeah, and it doesn't always serve the benefit of like the larger hospital institutions to provide that data to the consumer, but it's just super empowering. Imagine if you knew about your microbiome and like how that impacts like your overall wellness, or like if you had some type of wellness score based on your own data. I think that would be really explosive. There's just political things that definitely are still in the works, with just kind of the institutions and the incumbents. But I'm really excited about that as a data nerd myself, just kind of being able to, I think there's going to be a lot more ways of that in terms of human performance, longevity, being able to take that, the data and analytics and marry that with like the physical real-time things that are happening with physical businesses that have hard assets as well. So I think you mentioned that a few times, just kind of the data that kind of complements those cash flowing businesses.
Absolutely. It's there's so many sleeves to explore there. And imagine if you were taking a drug and you could actually speak to people who have your similar condition and have taken the same drug before you. You don't get that. You don't get that data. I think that's where we're going for sure. It's there's an interconnected world that will you can just see the next generation of availability of consumer awareness of your own personal health. So it's interesting though, on the more macro side, we also are big followers of industrial companies, private companies. I think that is really it's been an interesting they have strong pricing pass-through potential, possibilities in terms of dealing with the inflation. So they've been among the strongest to be able to manage their supply chains and manage their relationships. Many we follow that are in niche industries, chemicals that manage waste areas of landfills that are finished with their life of being a landfill and now need to be restabilized. Those kind of companies, we've seen teams have some of their best performance with just basic positive purpose companies that are really helping to solve enormous problems and find adjacent markets that are really attractive for the companies to keep propelling the growth. And so when you start from a small market share, you can definitely just cross geographies, and if you start with international distribution as well, so with partners. But the industrial areas that we're really kind of more excited about are definitely chemicals and that can help with both the recycling of e-waste. That's a big one. Some of the fire ravaged lands especially in the West Coast, you've seen enormous applicability of the ability to restabilize that land and avoid the landslides that come with the vegetation being lost. So you've really got to restabilize those properties. So we've been watching how industrial companies can just really be a force for good in terms of some of the biggest challenges we're facing, and in terms of just sustainability overall. So it's been a different way to look at an old industry, an old sector, and say where are the high growth potential areas inside this sector.
Yeah.
You think you know about the sector, just let's make sure we're aligning with teams that are unpacking and looking for really exciting changes going on.
On the manufacturing side, I've started to see a lot of synthetic biology being used to manufacture certain types of products that normally would be, harmful for the environment. But now there's a derivative of like a mushroom fungi that they can use to create a leather. So I don't know if that's something that you're interested in as well. Alternative types of manufacturing that are also good for the planet.
Mm-hmm. We've been hearing that from the consumer companies.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of pressure on both the whether it's beauty or textiles industries, in fashion, that the recycling and the sustainability of their products needs to improve. Whether it's recycling packages or it's products that have are using the right materials so that it's recycling, and it's also in a not just efficient for the ecology of it, but it's also the supply chains are very responsible, and there's just not, whether it's labor and other things as well. So there's a lot of pressure on those consumer companies, and I think that you really see there's a wave of new funds coming out that are focused on that. We've seen a couple coming through. So you're absolutely right. There's the other interesting thing is in the power generation supply. I don't know if you've been following some of the stories in industrial where, ultimately we're going to be balancing our load of power, and the electric vehicles may be a source if power goes out in your house. Some of these new electric vehicles are a source not just of taking power but providing power, and so you make the manufacturing of the components that allow that to happen is just a new wave of industrial growth as well.
Yeah, there's the new Cybertruck that's part of Tesla, right? It's that huge futuristic Cybertruck. But, there were some rumors that Elon thought about building like a van that could turn into a camper that was completely made out of solar panels. So the surface area was like big enough because you have a camper, right? It's a big larger surface area where like that solar energy is still charging, especially if you're, in the desert of Las Vegas, or just kind of in the deserts between Las Vegas and California. It's constantly harvesting that power, and hopefully one day you could maybe completely run off of that, maybe with a backup generator battery. But again, you could plug into that if you need to power different things, and maybe be self-sustainable for a couple of weeks. There's another category that I'm curious to hear your inputs on, and I wonder if this is the same category as the dental office or the assisted living facility, but I just feel there's a whole new wave of elderly care. So essentially, if you're in your 70s to 80s, you don't need medical care, and you're definitely still able to walk around, but it may just be more efficient, instead of living in your huge home and trying to get care to come in full time and be there, to be part of a community. So I just visited India, and I have a relative that is there, and it was a beautiful facility. And what's really interesting that I think about is, like, all of us, as we grow and we evolve our families, we have children, and then we also have parents that we're going to be worried about in the future. So I have cousins that are a little older than me that are more mindful of that. So, with family being in India, there's kids that are in America that there's pressure, right, to be able to afford that type of care. Like in America, I see some opportunities being in other destinations that could be more paradise feeling, or just more pleasurable to be in. But you can get that type of high-end care and support and community, and they're cash flowing, right? Because there's always somebody kind of living there for a certain amount of time. So was wondering about just your opinion in general in terms of like the market for care, and businesses that are tackling that, especially for like the aging, probably beyond the boomers, but just that sector as a whole. And I don't know if that's very capital intensive in your opinion, similar to, because I think that's what your concern is with the dental offices and some of these smaller clinics. There's a lot of overhead for like staff and personnel and equipment. and sometimes the margins in the EBITDA is not, and the multiples aren't big enough. But I'll pause here. Just wanted to hear your opinion on that.
So we definitely follow the elder care and
Mhm.
the fem health market, and also some specialty healthcare markets.
Mhm.
And it's interesting. We the elder care locations, physical locations, are in real estate. Or that plays more real estate, and that's not.
Yeah.
We don't have a real estate lens at all in our strategy. That's a different asset class for us. But there's a lot of technology services around that,
Mhm.
which are very fragmented industries.
Yeah.
And so there's definitely many angles. I think the monitoring, the technology, you really hear that the struggle, the generation
Mhm.
below the kids of the elder care person who needs
Yeah.
more acute care. It's
Mhm.
very taxing. And so cognitive care, all of the different pieces. So yeah, I think there's more trends to come there, but we don't have anything particular other than we've seen a couple of interesting mobility
Mhm.
transport themes in a couple of companies there, but nothing. We haven't seen anything in our pipeline coming through in terms of the real estate play there. That would be probably outside our pipeline, but
Yeah, that's a good insight in terms of how you guys categorize that. So I appreciate that.
yeah.
And then we have a couple other bullets we wanted to touch on real quick, some quick hits. So how does it work when you're an early investor? I think that's one of the bullets we had.
So there's very few investors who are really able to be that first check.
Mhm.
The manager isn't typically very fully organized yet. They haven't been asked all the questions. It's much
Yep.
easier to be the 20th investor, as I'm sure it's quite obvious. But so it's a consultative role, as we talked about, but it's also a deeper diligence. You just have to stick to your needs, requirements, and just keep sticking to them
Mhm.
because the managers, it's a lot of work. But they typically have to go away for a few weeks and come back and give you what you
Mhm.
need. So because they haven't prepared those documents yet. So, but you hold the pen. You can help them set up a really great governance in terms of, usually you're looking at the PPM, the private placement memorandum, asking for, okay, we want a really good definition of your universe here.
Mhm.
Why doesn't it say a very, so you're asking for some very obvious things. So we have an 18-page checklist of and that's what we do. And then we also get an external legal counsel when we do a closing.
Sure.
So, you really want to think about, when you're first, though, and someone's launching their first fund, I think that one of the hardest terms to even think about is the removal rights, because there are certain situations where the LPs will remove a GP. It happens 1 in 10,000. It's so rare. But to even see those terms, you've given your lifeblood to found this firm. And so those we try and navigate and just point to the ILPA standards and how the industry's evolved and what's key. The other thing is, I think that newly founding firms, if you look at the terms that Fund 8 is getting of a larger, one of the more dominant firms in the industry, they often say, oh, that firm has a 7-year investment period where you're getting the higher management fee calculation. And we actually say, no, you should be 4 years, and we want to be invested 4 years because we want our hold periods to be, we want you to be done by 10, latest 10. We want you to be starting distributions at year 5, 4 and 5. So there should be some of that. So we're keeping that tight. The reason why the large dominant firms in the industry have 7-year investment periods is because they've typically never used it, and they've only done 3, and then they're fully invested by year 3, and they're doing Fund 9 then. But that's not how a Fund 1 manager can get hooked, because their first year they're forming a new LP base, they're doing their first deals, it's a new firm, their operational build is still going on. And so you have to sort of keep those, you want to keep the parameters very tight. We typically, as an anchor investor in the early years, don't mind paying full management fees, but there's a lot of caveats on that. If they give anyone else a discount, we'll get that discount. But if everyone is paying, full management fees, we want them to use those management fees to build the firm, because what can happen in buyout, in particular, small buyouts, you have a lot of board seats to be on. And if you have, by the end of Fund 2, you'll have potentially 20 board seats to be on. And if you put 2 people on a board, that's 20 seats. And so you need a much larger team typically than you start with. And so we actually cap the salaries. That's why we don't mind paying higher management fees, as long as we can see a track that they're going to be adding more team members.
Yeah. They need the infrastructure and the support to be able to support their portfolio companies, essentially.
That's right.
So, one big thing, it's just a theme that you and I have both seen, is just differentiation. So there's thousands and thousands of funds out there, so many similar strategies. Many people invest in you, right? The person that you are, they believe in you. That's really what you have. But beyond that, how do you, what's your advice to the emerging managers to differentiate themselves? How do they make themselves different? And maybe just in your opinion, what has kind of gotten you excited about some of the managers that you've invested? You don't have to, name them or anything, but just kind of traits or just things that you've commonly seen as, wow, this is super different. And this is, a unique, novel strategy.
Yes. So as an anchor investor, our eye and our diligence involves talking to 20 other LPs that may have looked at this manager and may be coming in after us, and making sure that community, they're already making those connections in the community.
Yeah.
And what we know is to make those connections, what's overstated by managers typically is that, oh, we have this value added plan, we change staff, we tech enable the firm, we look at the pricing policy, we look strategically at adjacent markets, we help with new client introductions. You hear that in every deck. Mm-hmm. To really help solve the puzzle for us and other LPs, it's really a packing together of why they are the logical owners of this business and why they will first win deals that are similar to what they've done in the past, because and why and how they will how they are going to be value added, really powerful people on the board working with management, why they're the logical owners. And it's similar to the way you would think about hiring a heart surgeon. If you're going to get heart surgery, what would you look for in that person and that doctor's expertise? You want to see some level of being able to bring something very unique to those companies. And many times it's what you have done with the last 10, 15 companies you've invested in, or your operating experience. And it's the combined expertise of the team and why those skills make sense together. And
I'm assuming there's oftentimes an industry alignment too. Like if you have a healthcare strategy, maybe the person ran a hospital system for the last 15, 20 years, and he already has all the connections and the knowledge of the industry. So it makes sense for him to be building this firm aside from anybody else. Yeah.
And that in the private equity capital, that's capital plus expertise, will be respected by management when they walk in, and it's really a desired consulting time, not necessarily oh no, they're coming in. So it's very helpful when the partnership works productively like that.
Sure. Yeah, that's helpful. Well, we got a couple minutes left. The last thing that I want to end with on a positive note is just take a few seconds looking back, Sheryl, and think about some of the biggest learnings, both in life and institutional asset management in your career. What are some of the biggest learnings that you'd like to share with maybe incoming college students or people that are thinking about starting their own fund?
Well, a couple of things. One, I think it's interesting when you're a founder of something, you're really shaping something new. And I've been on 3 founding teams, both the family office, when I mentioned, and then Decagon and now Steward, and it's 3 times. And it's interesting. You need to have a source in your life, maybe many sources, of an enormous positive amount of energy. Like you have to. It doesn't always has to come from yourself, but it has to come from your team, those around you, and you really when you're with people that you've known 15 plus years or more. As in our case at Steward, you really have it's an easy relationship to know each other's strengths and really know when the person's in need. But when you're building something, there's a lot of learning, and so and there's good news and there's bad news, and when the bad news comes, you just adapt and grab it and say, what did we learn there, and move on. And so it's interesting. I find new forming fund managers will make 300 pitches and get 3 investors. It's a daunting task, but keeping track of every one of those relationships, because typically, a good portion of those 300 will be in your fund 3. So it's a matter of planning for all of that and just keeping relentless relationship management. You could just not have enough of reach out. I don't think any LP will say, and it's interesting, this is what happens a lot to us when we're getting to know a manager. Well, this great call, really interested in the manager. And then I sort of watch to see if they follow up with us. We don't even get an email for 3 weeks after the meeting. I'm like, the email should come in the day after saying, like, we've enjoyed the relationship. We'll get those things back to you. That's how a responsive relationship works. So it's really, I don't think any LP says, I get from my existing, investments, or ones I even have said that I want to, no one says they reach out too much.
Mm-hmm.
So that's for the ones you've shown an interest in and said you have. So it's there's a lot of great deal folks out there, but I don't think there are a lot of great deal folks who are also relationship folks. So it's that combination, which I'm sure you've heard before, but it's just very, very meaningful communications too, like really information, giving them a good update, and following up on what they've asked for. So that's very in short supply in the industry for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think on the nurturing side of the relationship, I think education is a great tool. So like if you're in the healthcare space, or if you're in the manufacturing space, even if the LP did not show interest in the first meeting, or they're just not in the right cycle, just keeping them informed with your newsletter, or some type of literature that you're sharing about your market. I think that definitely keeps them plugged in. But any other insights on, or just advice in terms of cadence? Definitely, like at least saying a thank you email, or following up in 3 weeks, and not seeing that as an observation. But any other advice in terms of just cadence or follow up for managers when they're trying to maybe get to their first close?
Yes. Well, that's the interesting thing is how quickly you can get phone calls back to investors when they have inbound. I have a test I run. This is for anyone who's listened this far in the video, you'll get a secret sauce. But I'll typically, if I meet a manager I'm very interested in, and I see they're in heavy setup mode, I'll leave a voicemail for them on a few days later and see if it takes them to call me back. I'm just wondering whether they can manage the next few steps. That's the question.
Oh, you mean just hearing the voicemail, just seeing if they can kind of like how they would respond to that?
Did you say this? And so usually with something I need, like, or some other thought I had on their business or something, and whether or not this is going to be a good relationship or not, or whether they can actually handle the intense setup. Because I always say with new managers, building the building is not like running the building. Building the building takes a lot of architectural planning, and so building a new asset management firm is something very special, and something our team has seen for a number of decades. But it's very intense for those who've come from especially big shops, who are used to having a lot of things handled for them. So it's a great point where we can add a lot of value.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you want to test teams and see how they're making it through.
To give you a final chuckle, so Sheryl, you and I have a common acquaintance that uses video. We're on video now as a medium, but what's really interesting is if you send somebody a LinkedIn message, or if you have their cell, or you text them and there's a video, it's like irresistible to like not click on that button to see what that video is about. It's like, oh my God, this guy sent me a video. I have to watch it. So I feel like, just being creative in terms of delivery, like you sent a voicemail, maybe they respond with a video. There's definitely a higher chance of you just being curious to want to open the video, or even just like a play button because they responded with some type of audio file. I was kind of moderately intrigued about, just seeing those different types of mediums that are being used, versus, maybe 2 decades ago when that technology or those mediums weren't available. So I think just kind of being creative and thinking about unique ways to maybe just have a higher conversion rate, or just, make sure that person opens the email. Obviously don't have a weird spammy headline, but just be something, maybe even something that's a little more personalized, I think could, maybe reach people or connect with people a little more intimately.
Yes. I haven't really explored the video. I'm
Mhm.
you know, maybe it's a generational thing. I'm like the
Yeah.
old-fashioned phone. Like I just pick up the phone
Mhm.
sometimes. I do it less and less these days. I think I need to go back to it. I really like that. Just being able to pick up the phone, because even by the time you
Yeah.
schedule 5 emails later, you're like, okay,
Mhm.
just could answer our questions by 10
Yeah.
minute phone call. If you just pick up my call, or you text and see if you're available by phone.
Mhm.
So it's there's some simpler ways to get things done than what we do today, but it's we'll see. There's definitely generational. I find the generation below me is very reliant on emails and texts.
Yeah.
And I'm of course we are too, but do definitely like developing a little bit of a one-on-one conversation sometime over phone,
Mhm.
just easier. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. But
Mhm.
Joel, this has been great. I just thrilled to have the time with you. You are so understated for what you do for the community. It's I can't wait to see the next iterations of your various platforms, and I've had a chance to double click on some of those. You really are creating interesting conversations. And what's planned for Sutton for 2024?
Well, we'll probably have to do another episode on that one. But yeah, we've got a lot of cool things that we're building. But yeah, I mean, more to come, and stay tuned. But look, this episode was to highlight your leadership, Sheryl. You are someone that I look up to as a role model, along with several other people. So appreciate all of the support that you've done for the community, and it's been great to be able to bond with you. And thank you so much for being generous with your time, and we'll catch up soon.
Thanks, Joel.
All
Take care.
right. Take care. Bye.